This episode of EMS One-Stop is brought to you by Lexipol, the experts in policy, training, wellness support and grants assistance for first responders and government leaders. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's lexipol.com.
We also looked at another cohort of hemodynamic instability defined as shock index of greater than or equal to 1. And that's been shown in prior studies to predict the need for a massive transfusion. But based on that criteria of hemodynamic instability, there were over 1.2 million patients over that 4-year period that were potentially eligible for pre-hospital blood product. And again, less than 1% of those patients received pre-hospital blood.
Hello and welcome to another edition of EMS One-Stop. I'm your host, Rob Lawrence, and the topic of the year, without a doubt, has to be the provision of blood, whole blood, constituent products or parts thereof. And there's a number of studies, and I've personally been waiting for the studies and the papers and the peer review stuff to come out, of course, to work out if we're going in the right direction. And one of those studies, one of those papers for consideration, which I think has some very real world considerations that we need to think about, we need to talk about, has come out. And to help me have that discussion, our good friend, Dr. Matt Levy, is with me, and also Dr. Christine Carico. Welcome both to EMS One-Stop.
Hey, Rob, it's so good to be back and to hang out and to talk all things EMS with you. So thanks for having us.
All things EMS. And Christine, thank you. First time caller, long time listener. But so first of all, let's do some backstories. And Christine, please tell us about yourself.
So I'm originally from California, but came out to the University of Alabama at Birmingham to do my MD and PhD training. And my PhD training was in very kind of basic sciences, biochemistry, structural biology. And I ultimately was interested in going into general surgery and specifically trauma. So I started working with the trauma group at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, trying to get involved in some of the ongoing research. And my mentor and the senior author of this paper, Dr. Zain Hashmi, he invited me to be part of this paper since I had some coding experience, and doing kind of the coding behind this large database study was really within my wheelhouse. And especially just how interesting and important this topic was, it was just an opportunity I jumped at.
Wonderful. And you need no introduction, Dr. Levy, but off you go.
Thank you, Rob. So, hey, everybody. Matt Levy. This is now my 30th year in EMS. Started off as an EMT, went to paramedic school, then decided to continue my education and went to medical school. And now am doing amazing, getting to work with amazing people every day as an EMS medical director and system planner. And really my focus is on systems of care and how do we build better systems of care to save more lives, both locally, regionally, nationally, and globally. So the blood programs that I've had the privilege of being part of really are just have been a career highlight for all the reasons everybody already knows. So thanks for making the time, Rob, to talk to us about this.
No, it's great. And actually, I just remembered we were about to have a conversation last time round, and then your bridge, sadly and tragically, fell into the harbour, and that was a bit of a big event for you.
That's right. Yeah, maybe we can make some time to talk about that, because that's the notion of we plan and we build and we do things, and then things happen along the way, and sometimes bridges come back and then we rebuild them better and stronger, metaphorically and literally. So make some time to talk about that too.
There we go. You've just talked yourself into another webinar and podcast. Okay. So thank you. So let's get on to the paper. And Christine, what did you set us up by describing the paper as presented? And obviously this sort of work you mentioned already, just a massive data set that you've had to deal with. So literally talk about the setup for us.
So what we had done was we looked at the National Emergency Medical Services Information System, or NEMSIS, and between the years of 2020 and 2023, we identified all EMS activations that were related to a potential injury. We then took all of those activations. We excluded the interfacility transfers, so we really just looked at patients that were transported from scene to the hospital. And we also excluded activations for reasons other than blunt or penetrating trauma. So we really just wanted to look at blunt and penetrating trauma. So we excluded things like drowning or asphyxiation, and other kind of non-traumatic injuries that could have been activated as well. And then we really were only looking at the adult population. So we excluded all of the patients that were under 16 years of age, keeping only 16 and older. And then from that population, we then separated patients into two cohorts. And these were not mutually exclusive cohorts, so patients could fall in either or both of these cohorts. One of those cohorts, we defined hemodynamic instability as systolic blood pressure of under 90 with a heart rate of over 108, or just a systolic blood pressure of under 90. So that was one of our groups of hemodynamic instability. The other group was a shock index of greater than or equal to 1, and shock index is defined as heart rate divided by systolic blood pressure. Both of those have been shown in various studies and trials to really predict the need for transfusion after injury and really predict that a patient's in shock and needs a transfusion. So interestingly, in that cohort with shock index of greater than or equal to 1, over those 4 years, there were 1.2 million patients that were eligible for pre-hospital blood transfusion over that 4-year period that we looked at. In our other cohort, looking at the systolic blood pressure and heart rate individually, there were about 262,000 patients that were eligible for pre-hospital blood product. And in both of those cohorts, less than 1% of those patients actually received pre-hospital blood product as they were transported from scene to the hospital.
So I always have to say this. I am a huge Nemesis fan, first of all. Not many other areas of healthcare delivery can we actually, collate and then extract very, very easily and very, very quickly, relatively speaking, that amount of data. Nemesis, I think when I last looked, 53 million records in a year, 36 million transports in a year, 14,000 agencies reporting every year. It's a massive data set, and obviously it helps us do what we do and do what you do. So again, I'll always shout out for Nemesis, but the study shows a significant unmet need for pre-hospital blood products, and I think we appreciate that and we realize that now. But what are the key barriers for agencies from just fully implementing blood transfusion protocols in the field? Now, I have to say that every time I open up one of our EMS trade magazines, somebody else has started one program, which is fantastic. But what are those barriers?
So, Rob, it's really an interesting question. I think if we were to use the 4 S's model to how we think about logistics and how we think about implementation, stuff, supplies, space, and systems in particular, we can talk about each of those and elements within each of those that are really the challenge. But at the core of the challenge is really getting the blood. And we're currently up to 230, maybe I think it's 231 as of today, EMS systems, ground-based EMS systems that are doing pre-hospital blood. That's out of over nearly 5,000 EMS ground-based systems in the country. So we got some work to do, so to speak. But the biggest single barrier has been getting access to blood, and that's for good reason, because blood is truly one of the most precious commodities. And so once you overcome that barrier, which has to be overcome locally and regionally, then the rest tends to fall into place, so to speak. I mean, the one thing we do really well in EMS is logistics, right? That's what EMS, particularly as paramedics, we do really, really well. So the other stuff we can pull together fairly quickly. It's getting the blood, and then of course all of the collateral aspects that need to go with that: training, education, QA/QI. There's how-tos for all that stuff.
Somebody once said that amateurs think about operations and professionals think about logistics. So it is
100%.
it is absolutely the way there. But I think you just kind of hinted at something that we need to talk about. There are regional variations between states, and I've certainly had Dr. Randall Schaefer on before, talking about sort of ambulance deserts, blood deserts, and there are some areas where it's prolific and other areas where it's no chance so far. Major consideration, I would have thought.
So part of we have an interesting opportunity here, Rob. So the transfusion medicine community, of which I'm not necessarily part of, but I'm becoming part of more and more, and the EMS community, we don't really know a lot about each other. In fact, you can almost think we're like on opposite ends of this spectrum. And so, the transfusion medicine programs around the country, the blood banks in particular, they're regional programs, not unlike regional EMS systems. And so there's going to be variations, not just in how product is obtained. When I say product, I mean blood, how it's obtained, and then, of course, how it's distributed throughout a given geographic area, and then, of course, how it's handled. And so it's hard to have one singular discussion, but what I would say is what we're finding now as we're in this renaissance phase of blood programs is that these conversations have to happen um, almost the first time every time when a new program is coming online. Just to give you one example, even in my neck of the woods, we in Maryland have a statewide protocol that allows our paramedics to administer blood. My colleagues in the state police have been administering blood for some time now. We're doing it in my ground-based system, and several other systems are coming online. And just the other day, I was meeting with another county-based EMS system in my state that wants to do this. Yet we find ourselves having the same initial discussion over and over again. The important thing to know is that don't get frustrated with that. That's part of the process. This is innovation. But as Christine and I will tell you from the work that we've done is, there's tremendous opportunity to help a lot more people. And that's really, really what this is about. At the end of the day, yes, this is about logistics, but it's about giving people precious time to get to definitive care. At its core, that's what this is about.
I think I just heard you say though that once you've seen one blood bank system, you've seen one blood bank system. That's a phrase I think I've heard somewhere before.
Yeah,
So,
it's not quite as translatable metaphorically to you've seen one EMS system,
right.
but it's not that different either, Rob.
Okay, so in other words, you've got to get to know them, get to know how they roll, and work with them. Now, of course, one of the things we're seeing, and ESO Wave has just finished, and I saw a lot of data come out of Wave where they've obviously everybody's looking at blood, and it's not just penetrating trauma that's causing blood products to be delivered now. So there's an increasing number of patients eligible as well as in the system. So I mean, talk about now who is within our sort of net of eligible patients.
So, one of the things, Rob, if I could pause for a second, I think that what might be beneficial for those joining the podcast here to do would be let's talk about what we did with the study that Christine and the team that we did. We'll talk about how we extrapolated that, which really had more of a focus on trauma, but is also translatable to the medical patients, because you're exactly correct in that this life-saving intervention can benefit more than just those suffering from traumatic hemorrhagic shock. At the end of the day, the body's tissues don't care why they're being deprived of nutrient and oxygen. They're just being deprived of them. And so the medical thing is absolutely part of the discussion, but it becomes a little bit harder to contextualize in big data, which we'll come back to, but we can do it a little bit easier with trauma data to give us a sense of the land. And then we can talk about, we know that about a third, give or take, of pre-hospital blood administrations are for medical reasons. So we can begin to then extrapolate from that. So if that's okay with you, I'd like to kick it over to Christine for a second.
No, please do. And
talk about what we did.
We really want to get out of it all of the data and the presentation as well. So please do.
And then the only other thing I want to say before I let my colleague take over is that we keep using the word data, and we've used the word data a lot. We've used the term NIMSIS, our National EMS Information Systems. And for all of our listeners and viewers, please understand that when you're clicking and checking those boxes on the patient care report and you're trying to get through that report as quickly as possible, that data ends up being really important, not just for the patient that you're documenting on for the legal reasons that you're documenting, but we can only do the best analysis of how to make EMS better with good data. Otherwise, if we get garbage in, all we get is garbage out on the data documentation, and it becomes really hard to clean the data. And so with that, I'll transition over to Christine, because it does become hard at times to draw meaningful conclusions otherwise.
So what we initially did with this data is we identified all EMS activations that were activated for potential injury or trauma. And then from those patients, we excluded interfacility transfers. So we were just looking at patients that were transported from scene to a hospital. And of those patients, because we were looking at adult patients, we excluded all patients that were under the age of 16 years old. So we included 16 and above. And then we did break down, just for our own demographic purposes, we did kind of break down, we looked at different age groups. We also looked at different mechanisms of injury. So whether it was blunt injury, penetrating injury, such as MVCs for blunt injury, or stabs, shots, shotgun injuries for penetrating injuries. And of those patients, we then separated them into two different cohorts. One of the cohorts was identified as a shock index of greater than or equal to 1. And shock index is defined as systolic blood pressure over heart rate. And the other group that we looked at was systolic blood pressure of less than 90 and a heart rate of above 108, or just a systolic blood pressure of under 70. So we looked at how many patients were in each cohort of hemodynamic instability. And from those cohorts, we then looked at how many of those patients actually received pre-hospital blood product. And interestingly enough, when we were looking at blood product, we tried to look at what type of blood product was received by these patients. And most of that blood product was actually documented as not otherwise specified. So it would have been really interesting to be able to see whether it was whole blood, packed red blood cells, plasma, platelets, cryoprecipitate that was received by these patients. But a lot of that blood product was not actually described within the documentation that we were able to pull from NEMSIS.
That's a fascinating statement, and it goes back to what Matt was just talking about the accuracy of the data. Do you think people aren't putting it in because it's, not a billable item currently, or is it just the heat of the moment? I'm just going to put gave blood or gave something. I mean, Matt, what do you think the reason for that is? And
So
obviously,
I
there's a major lesson here going forward.
Yeah, so the pragmatist to me says that we're at a very interesting crossroads in time and technology, which is that our technological systems, our documentation systems can capture very discrete data. But there's only so much I could expect me, you, or any other medic in the back of a unit to do on top of everything else like that. So I'm optimistic that as technologies, AI, other things get better, we'll be able to have better granularity of this data. But you're exactly right, Rob, in that one of the challenges is depending upon which version of NIMSIS an EMS system is using and which EMR software they're using, some may not have that granularity of data. And so when it gets when they try to map that back to the NIMSIS source code, it becomes a problem. Now, some of our authors or collaborators on this project were from the NIMSIS Tech Center. And so the good news is we're all looking at this problem eyes wide open to try to make sure that our data systems can capture what we need to as well. Otherwise, it becomes an absolute headache post hoc after the study to try to figure out who did what, who got what. So it's
Right.
I attribute it to being an interesting secondary problem that's symptomatic of a different problem, is what I would say, Rob.
No, it's interesting, and obviously, I see that Dr. Clayman is in fact a name on the top of the list there. He's also a friend of the show. Now, obviously, once you've submitted your EPCR, it becomes state data, it becomes NEMSIS data, it moves up through the tree. Sometimes it's difficult to kind of do a little addendum here, but perhaps there's an opportunity for that sort of immediate, QA/QI, or whatever you call it in your organization, to actually go, this is going to be an event that triggers some sort of review, I would have thought, transfusion, and therefore a quick check of the record. And again, depends on when you have to submit your EPCR interstate data, etc. But there's probably something to take away, I think, from that as well, perhaps.
And indeed, I think that there's a lot of really good lessons learned that have come out
Yeah,
of this.
yeah,
That's one of them. But as this is, not to be sensationalizing, but this is kind of like a space race kind of thing right now, right? We know
right.
that blood saves
Yeah,
lives. We know that early blood saves lives. Different blood products are still being evaluated, but at this moment in time, as of today's recording, it's whole blood of the low titer type. That's what we want to get, but we want to get any blood that we can. If you can't get that in your system, it doesn't mean don't do it. It means get the blood that you can, because the last thing you want to give these patients is crystalloid. That we all agree to. And so as we're building these systems and building them so rapidly, Rob, we have to build the support infrastructure around them, the documentation systems, the QA/QI systems. And interestingly enough, this is another important week because just this week, the AABB, the American Association of Blood Biotherapies, they released their standards, their for pre-hospital blood transfusion, and that is the national standard-setting organization for blood banks. There's a confluence happening, Robin. There's good energy around it. Is what I'd say.
Excellent. As Kevin Colopy said to me on camera once, that listen, it came out of them. We just seek to put it back into them. And with that note, we're just going to take a quick break.
Lexipol empowers first responders and public servants to best meet the needs of their residents safely and responsibly. Serving more than 2 million public safety and government professionals in over 8,000 agencies and municipalities, Lexipol offers a range of solutions that includes policies, training, behavioral health resources, news and analysis, and grant assistance services for law enforcement, fire and rescue, EMS, local government, and other agencies dedicated to public safety. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's LEXIPOL.com.
And we're back. Please make sure that you like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from, and also give us a like on YouTube. Remember that all of the EMS One stable of podcasts are also vodcasts. We go out on Apple Podcast or wherever. We're also on YouTube, so you can either listen to us, or you can see us, or you can do both. We're here for in every medium that wherever you consume your education and your listening. We're talking about the blood paper from with Dr. Christine Carico and returning guest Dr. Matt Levy. Just before we went to the break, obviously great conversation, but of course I haven't asked the critical question about the findings, Christine.
What we had found was that within our two cohorts of patients with hemodynamic instability, one of our cohorts that was defined by systolic blood pressure less than 90, heart rate over 108, or systolic blood pressure less than 70, within that cohort between 2020 and 2023, there were 260,000 patients that were eligible for pre-hospital blood based on that vital sign criteria. But less than 1% of those patients actually received pre-hospital blood. We also looked at another cohort of hemodynamic instability defined as shock index of greater than or equal to 1. And that's been shown in prior studies to predict the need for a massive transfusion. But based on that criteria of hemodynamic instability, there were over 1.2 million patients over that 4-year period that were potentially eligible for pre-hospital blood product. And again, less than 1% of those patients received pre-hospital blood.
That leaves us with a heck of a lot to do, Matt. I mean, first of all, what do our hospital colleagues think about the fact that we're getting into the blood transfusion business? Is there a thought? Is there an opinion? Is it like, yeah, go for it, or is there a reservation? And again, if this is a political question, we can also cut it out. But what's the view?
So as you would imagine, Rob, there's lots of opinions, and some of them are emotionally driven, some are evidence driven. And as a scientist and a scholar, we try to follow the data and the evidence. But, when you see someone bleed out in front of you and you realize that we just wish we had 5 more minutes to get them optimized, to get them to the OR or to get hemorrhage control, sometimes it's important to recognize that your own objectivity can be compromised. That all being said, those who have seen the value and the impact that pre-hospital blood programs have had in their systems become instant advocates and champions for them. Now, we have to acknowledge a couple things here. First and foremost, these are resuscitative programs. Okay, these are not people who are a little anemic or a little this or a little shaky. These are people who as my colleague just eloquently stated, we have every reason to believe that if we don't take this action of giving uncross-matched, non-type specific blood to a patient, we don't take that action, the probability of death being imminent is high. None of us have a crystal ball, right? None of us know how long someone can compensate for it. But what we do know is with some of the numbers that we used as the benchmarks in this paper, these are predictive of bad outcomes. That being said, if we keep that as our true north, and we keep that as what we're building these programs around, we tend to be doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people. But here's the rub. The challenge is we have a blood supply challenge, both in the US and around the world.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, one of my charges to all of our viewers and listeners today is donate blood. And if you can't donate blood, make someone else donate blood for you, right? Or encourage others to do it. If your EMS system wants to build a blood program, a great place to start is a blood drive. Okay, because we have to begin to sustain these programs. So when you talk about the people who've got concerns about programs, oftentimes once those people who don't necessarily understand what we can do in EMS will have concerns about the logistics, about supply chain, about cold storage, about can we move product around and not waste product. The answer is unequivocally yes, we can do that, okay, without any issue. We know how to do that. We can do that. We've proven we can do it. The 230 programs that are online right now, we're doing that very well. So then it becomes a discussion of, well, do we have enough blood to go around to do that? And that's where this discussion gets a little more impassioned, because what do you do when you don't have enough blood? And where is that blood best served? And nobody, Rob, nobody wants to throw out blood, right? They just don't. So what do we do? How do we move that blood through the system so after a week or two in the field, if we're keeping it within storage parameters, we can get it back on the shelf in the hospital? That's where this gets a little bit harder. Right now, we're limited because we're using human-derived blood products. As synthetic products come on the market, as better storage things such as liquid plasma that can be spray dried and last longer come on the market, we will have more solutions. But the discussion is usually one about practicality and where is that blood best served.
So actually, you mentioned rotating the product if you're not using it. Obviously, we talked about getting in cahoots with the blood banks, but having a friendly neighborhood hospital that's going to be part of that circulation, that rotation, and that program is another item on your to-do list when you're starting this off.
It is, and don't be discouraged, because the reflexive answer that you're going to get from most local hospitals and most places is no, we're not taking blood back from you. And that comes from the space. I'm reminded of what a colleague said to me early in my journey in bringing a blood program online, which is, you got to remember, in the world of medicine, of the most regulated things, you have radioactive isotopes, you've got chemotherapeutic agents, you've got controlled substances, and you've got bloods. So it comes from a space of this group protecting their house as much as possible because of how precious this blood supply is. So understand that those discussions need to be had in a very strategic and progressive manner if you want to get to yes.
So you've all laid out the case elegantly. And of course, I'm a recovering EMS chief, you know that. And my number one question, as always, is who the hell's paying for this then? We have some challenges there. And again, we probably know how to overcome these, but what are you telling us right now to do?
So when we look at the total cost of these programs and we look at the cost of other interventions and other things that we need to have to do business, it, from a big numbers perspective, comparatively, it's not much more. I mean, Rob, if one of your medics comes to you and says, "Hey, Chief, I'm really sorry, but I lost one of the new radios, one of the new two-way radios." What's one of these trunking 800 megahertz thing radios cost now? $5,000-6,000 a piece for these portable radios?
I can tell you the answer. It's eye-watering. There we are.
Okay. What if I told you the blood cooler costs a little bit less than that?
Of course, it is.
So yes, the numbers are big. And I'm not saying don't have radios have coolers. I'm saying like what we have to think about this is comparatively in terms of other things. So the answer is you build these programs progressively in a stepwise fashion. You can't half-ass this. Forgive the vulgarity. You have to be all in if you're going to do these programs, because this is you are taking trust in the supply chain that is so precious. But the cost tends to not be the initial cost of getting the coolers, getting the supply equipment tends not to be the only barrier. The real barrier is access to the blood products. And so you have to figure is on average, you're looking at, for a unit of low titer or positive blood, it's in the $500 to $600 range, give or take. By the time you get through the disposable single-use equipment of administration, we use the number of $1,000 per unit of blood transfused as a big back of napkin number for calculations when we talk about this stuff. So if I'm your medical director and you're my chief, and I say, Chief, I got this great idea, we're going to give blood and save lives, and you say, Doc, come on, how much money do you need now, right? This is a discussion my chief and I have all week long. And I say, well, for every patient we save, every patient we do this to, I need $1,000. But what if I told you that we're going to save 95% of them? And they're going to end up using less blood in the hospital. You're going to say, that's great, Doc, but that doesn't help my budget, right? So this is the fundamental challenge with how EMS is reimbursed in this stage, in this country. That's a whole other podcast, Rob. But what I would say is that there are grant programs that are available. The first blood program I got to help build was we used Homeland Security grant dollars from a mass casualty readiness fund we had. Right now, there's the Safe Streets for All program that the Fed that NHTSA has. There may be opportunities through that program. So be creative, be legal, okay, but be resourceful in how you build these programs, and it doesn't have to happen overnight.
Our group had also just published a nationwide survey of EMS units across the country. And out of the 150 that were polled, about 53 responded, but only 11% of those agencies reported actually receiving reimbursement for the blood products they used in the field.
It's a huge problem, and it becomes cost of doing business. And so for all of these incremental interventions, it becomes a cost of doing business. So the real question is, if Rob and his colleagues as chief officers have a certain amount of money to spend to keep the system afloat, do they buy video laryngoscopes? Do they buy blood? What do they buy? What don't they buy? And so these are hard decisions that system leaders have to make. And so the answer is we have to figure out where the system is at, and follow the data, which is what I think we want. Christine and I want the listeners to know. Right now, the evidence points towards doing this. And as the evidence changes and the science becomes more clear, we continue to refine those guidelines.
And you mentioned, the cost. Oh, I mentioned the cost of doing stuff. I was at EMS on the Hill a few weeks ago with an EMT, and one of the folk at the pre-conference had this really good idea: is that when you have your elected officials in, and of course it's getting legislation, getting laws changed, getting, those folk in the centre to increase reimbursement for this procedure, which makes it more prolific. And I share this in another podcast, but I'll share it again today. If you have your elected official round to your ambulance location, have a game of the Price is Right with them, and have little cards that say, how much do you think this monitor is? This is to your point, Matt, about the radio, right? I'm holding this radio. How much do you think it is, Senator, Assemblyman, person with political title? Well, I think that's a radio. It's probably $2,000. Wrong. It's $6,000. And then we sort of play this game where all of a sudden you go, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that this entire treatment vehicle you have here that's called an ambulance has, $750,000 to $250,000 worth of equipment in it before you even get going. And therefore it costs money to save lives. And we need people to actually realize that this is an investment in life saving, and obviously blood. Yes. So to answer your question, I could invest in a lot of stuff, and there are a lot of, you go to any EMS exposition these days and there are people trying to sell me stuff left, right and center. I've got to make the right decision and buy the right stuff. And obviously this is certainly high on my priority, by the way, to purchase, but it's not a given that we have the money to invest in it.
The other thing, Rob, to your point is, and I'll try to be as brief as possible, is that these tend to be, as Christine and I will tell you from our study, that while we have much work to do, when we look at the overall number of cases that are in NEMSIS, Christine, was it 53 million or whatever, I forgot that year was, it's still a small percentage. But these are the percentage of people who, if we don't get it right, they're not going to have a good outcome. So they are the ones that are most vulnerable for bad outcomes. Just to pivot for one more second, this study talks about trauma in particular, but we know that of those EMS systems that are out there doing this work, in some cases, like in my system, it's about a third. In some cases, it's more than a third of the patients who receive pre-hospital blood do so for medical reasons. Could be GI bleeding, could be peripartum hemorrhage, could be any number of reasons that people bleed from a medical etiology. And I have to tell you, those patients do really well when we get them that blood earlier on. So we're thinking about this from an injury perspective, and it absolutely is true from an injury perspective, but there's more value. There's an equally valued, opportunity to help more patients. The injury numbers because of the good work of our trauma system planners over many decades, we've got better optics on injury numbers through trauma registries and good data. So it's easier for us to look at that data set. But the medical stuff is not far behind. In fact, I'm in the midst of a fairly large project that we're working on now to look at that's defining what the right outcome metrics are for blood programs for this very reason.
Excellent. So the question I ask all of my guests at the end of every podcast recording is this: is there anything I've forgotten to ask, or anything you need to tell us, Christine?
I think, we've really covered it. While the numbers that this paper shows are huge, over 4 years, up to 1.2 million traumatically injured patients could benefit from pre-hospital blood. That doesn't even account for the medical necessity, like we had just discussed. And that also, in terms of supply, that doesn't even address the units that are needed in hospital. Patients are receiving blood product during operations, during surgeries, post-operatively as well. So just the supply demand is huge for pre-hospital blood. It's not just for traumatically injured patients. It's a much larger question of how do we really meet this supply? How do we, provide all of this blood that people really need, both pre-hospital and in hospital? So it's a much larger question than even just this paper is showing. And I think the numbers even from this study are pretty daunting. There's a really, really big demand that we have, and it is not even half of the demand that we have nationwide.
Indeed. And Matt, same question to you, but with a caveat: where are we going to be in 5 years' time with this?
So this is another example, Rob, of how important EMS is to the larger healthcare system, and how the days of us being just the people who operate the ambulance and we then go back and to our EMS base or station or wherever we go back to, our fire companies, whatever model you have, and wait for the next call. EMS is at the tip of the spear of the acute care health system. And that's exactly where I think we're going to continue to be in the next 5 years. But there's a challenge, Rob. With that, kind of like in the Spider-Man quote, with great responsibility, great privilege comes great responsibility, right? So we have to step up our game. We have to act the part. We have to be the part. We have to embrace a culture and a community of lifelong learning. We have to celebrate and promote academic research and scientific research within the EMS community. And we have to begin to look at how we can continue to measure and improve both everyday practice, but also innovations like this. We're at a neat point. The neat point is that EMS is recognized as its own specialty in medicine, and we are practicing medicine, maybe practicing under a delegation or someone else's license in the case of a pre-hospital clinician. But this is the practice of medicine, make no mistake about it. And so we have to study it, we have to measure it, we owe it to our patients and to their families and to the next generation that we continue to do this. So 5 years from now, I don't have a crystal ball, but if I did, I would say that there will be some type of blood product on most ALS ambulances in this country. It may not be a bag of red stuff. Okay. In fact, it probably won't be. But I think what we will see is, if you were to borrow from a BLS ALS approach, you will probably see some level of a blood product like a plasma that is shelf stable and can be reconstituted ubiquitously out there because it's going to be inexpensive and easy to get. You will then see regional coverage of actual blood products such as low titer positive whole blood or other blood products out there. And then the next tier beyond that is probably synthetic blood products, which will be even more shelf stable. I don't know how quickly we'll get to those. A lot depends on that. But what I would say is that what we should be doing right now is teaching and learning about the importance of systems of care, of resuscitation, and of integrating into a larger health system. We can't just be the people in the corner who drive ambulances and go home. That's 40-year-old thinking.
That was an amazing bottom line up front, actually, and you just gave me the 2-minute soundbite I needed, and that everybody needed to hear that. So that was amazing, and thank you. So thank you both for coming on EMS One-Stop. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And how can we get in touch with you, and how can we follow you, Christine?
I'm on LinkedIn. I check that pretty regularly. and I will be doing my general surgery residency at UCSF.
Excellent.
So I, like Christine, I'm on LinkedIn. It's probably the best way to reach me professionally. If you linkedin.com/Dr. Matt Levy is my LinkedIn bio. But sincerely do reach out. We're all in this together. No one has all the answers. But I want to make sure that patient gets the best care no matter where they're at. And happy to help and happy to come back anytime and talk more about this, Rob. Thank you for making the time to talk about it.
No, thank you. And I've got a whole list of Matt Levy podcasts I need to do now, so I'm going to just work my way through the list. Can you come back every week?
It would be my privilege.
Thank you. So for the moment, thank you both very, very much. Obviously, that was a very short, very sharp, and very pointed look at the paper that is being presented. You can catch that in the show notes. You can catch the contact details of our guests in the show notes. I also wrote a quick sort of explainer of the paper, which you can also read at EMS1.com. That's it for the moment. Please, once again, make sure that you like and subscribe. Thank you to my guests, Dr. Matt Levy and Dr. Christine Carico. I've been Rob Lawrence, and until next time, bye for now.